We are back with another episode of Mission Control, the Bellwether Enterprise Podcast. Today's guest on the show is Bellwether Vice President Ilya Weinstein. Ilya is a part of the Affordable Housing Group in Bellwether's New York City office. The theme for today's topic is the importance of affordable housing and having a stable, consistent place to live. Ilya brings a very unique perspective to the subject, having firsthand experience living in affordable housing after he immigrated to the United States with his family when he was just a young boy.
So I reached out because I thought there's a great connection in affordable housing. It's been such an active topic, whether, nationwide in various publications, in the political forum, it's now being raised in all the political debates. And so I thought I'd reach out and give my family's story.
Yeah. And I certainly think it's a unique perspective, I think, for a lot of people who are in your position now. I'm assuming there's not very many who started out where you started to get to where you are now. So
sure. So my family, so specifically my mother, my father, Marina and Yakov, and my grandmother, Ina, we left Russia. We immigrated from Moscow, Russia, right before the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. So I was 11 months old.
Wow.
We had 4 pieces of luggage. We still have a few of those in the attic, which is pretty neat, and $1,000. Wow. And we made the jump, and we came as political refugees through a Jewish-funded organization. And our first stop, we had a few options, and we ended up in Brooklyn. And our first stop, and I started learning more, as the years went on, right? The parents start revealing more details as to how you got here and why it's important. And so our first stop was St. George Hotel in Brooklyn. And my dad claims it was a shelter. I haven't found clear evidence of that. I am the millennial who's Googling this, and I can't quite find that detail. It was at a minimum a hostel. All 4 of us were in one room. We shared, there was a communal bathroom, a communal kitchen. Hostels are cool when you're in college. I don't know how cool they are when you're with your whole family in one room, right? It's a unique and tough situation, but we were there for, I got to say, probably a month or so. And let me take a step back there too. So sure. Before we arrived in America, we went through Vienna and Italy before we arrived here. So I took my first steps, and I had my first birthday in Italy. And for what it's worth, I think it's a pretty cool detail. So we made a couple of jumps, and that's just how there was really a huge flood and influx of Eastern European emigres who landed in America in the late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. And we were part of that exodus, if you will. And so, we landed in Brooklyn at the St. George Hotel. We're there for about a month or so. And then we were able to get an apartment, not a big one. It was, again, we're going to see this theme quite a bit, but it was a studio apartment for the 4 of us, right? And my grandma and I think shared one room, and my parents had the living room and with the pull-out couch. That's really how it all started. From there, my dad had an engineering degree, right? So he took, he did get a job in engineering, a small engineering firm, I believe out in Staten Island. Along the way, actually got fired from one of those jobs, and then started reconsidering everything. And I learned that a little bit ago. I didn't know that. He thought about accounting at one point. So you start to see all the different scenarios that your parents go through. And,
right.
He at one point reconsidered everything and was considering going to accounting or computer programming, but stayed with the engineering field. He was also a Domino's delivery boy, probably the oldest one Domino's has ever had. He did that as well. So there's it's a really unique situation. Again, my mother was a secretary for some time, and they slowly but surely both climbed the ladder, the corporate ladder, if you will. And now my father now runs a small engineering consulting firm in New York City. So that's really, the high level.
Talk about the American dream. That's about as American dream as it gets.
Right.
And it's obviously, like we said, interesting perspective and uniqueness, if you will, from where you started, basically living in what you're now, helping produce loans for. It's definitely something that I would imagine is pretty unique. When did you know that you wanted to do what you do now and kind of almost give back in the way that you benefited from when you were so young, and now you're, doing that same thing for others?
That's a good question. It wasn't 8 years old and decided I wanted to be in affordable housing finance, right? It sort of happened. I hate to say this, but it sort of happened serendipitously. I was looking for a job. I ended up at a company called Centerline, which at one point I think was the largest LIHTC syndicator in the country, I think. But they were a big presence in the space, and I at first was as an asset management analyst, overseeing affordable housing properties. But I didn't know that's what I wanted to do. I moved over to the debt side at some point, but actually worked for Jim Gillespie and Phil Melton at Centerline before I rejoined them here. It didn't dawn on me that this is exactly what I wanted to do. There's so many other fields, specifically in real estate. I started seeing that there was a special connection, right? My family came from humble beginnings. We lived in an apartment that, I sometimes I think it was naturally occurring affordable, right? Mm-hmm. But more than likely, it was just we bit the bullet and we're 4 people in a studio,
right?
Right. I mean, that's the reality of it. But I started finding more meaning in my work, and started really understanding the significance of having stable housing and having a stable foundation, if you will, to help families and to help families advance and find an opportunity to really advance in their lives. And it all really stems from housing. And that's, you look back at my family's journey, and it absolutely stemmed from having a stable home or a shelter or somewhere to go. You knew where you were going to go every night, regardless of where it was, or what the conditions were like. You knew that was a place you can call home, and it established everything else from there on. And I started, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in this field, but as I started working in the financing side and some of the more complex transactions, and I love that aspect as well, right? There's a dual aspect there. It's twofold for me. But I really started finding meaning in my work. And if I could help, just seeing what it did for my family, if I could help at least one family, right? Just at a minimum, one family have a stable home or stable foundation. You could just, I would like to think I'm the byproduct and my family's the byproduct of that. So why not help another family out there? Before
we kind of started with the podcast, you had mentioned some things so far as like the supply and demand shift over the next several years and what that might look like.
Right.
What are you seeing shaping up in the whole affordable space for, years to come, I guess?
Right. So there is an absolute disparity, supply demand disparity, in that there's way more demand than what the market is supplying for affordable housing today. So, not to be a dork here, but there is the Kennedy School at Harvard produces a study, I think every year or every other year or so, on housing. Mm-hmm. And although it's on housing, it mostly or almost exclusively discusses affordable housing and the need for affordable housing. And so, I mean, some of the statistics lately are staggering. There was a stat in there that said 47%, right? So nearly half of our country is cost burden, which means that they are attributing 30% or more of their income for rental housing or for housing, which is that's a staggering statistic, right?
Yeah, and for New York City, I could only imagine.
Yeah, that's almost the norm, right?
Yeah,
we just take it.
Yeah,
right. But and you're just seeing, with the influx of people entering cities, that is becoming a larger problem or a growing problem. So there's that statistic. There's also something that we were discussing earlier. The Kennedy study predicts or is observing that about 1 million or a little bit over 1 million units that are now considered affordable will be exiting their affordability restrictions in some form. So they may not go back into the affordable space. They may go out directly to become market rate. And right now, as an industry, in the LIHTC industry, we are creating 80,000 LIHTC units per year. So at that pace, over the next 10 years, we won't even be able to meet the units that are exiting their affordability restrictions. And if that doesn't tell you the story
Paired
that's
with
occurring,
the deficiency
right,
already,
right.
I
mean, we will not even be able to meet the demand, the future demand for this country's population. We'll just have to keep up with the units that are coming out of compliance or exiting their affordability regulations.
You have that deficiency. What can be really done? What can be done to shorten that gap, if you will?
Right. So shrink that gap.
Yeah.
Right?
What are we going to be able to do? Obviously, if everyone, you had all the magical answers, it'd be in a whole lot different perspective. But what can you really see being done?
That'd be Ben Carson, I guess. It's not to say that cities or federal housing agencies aren't doing their part, right? There's gap funding being put in place, right? To if there's any spot in the capital stack that can't be filled, there's soft financing of some sort from various municipalities or city and state authorities. There are things being done, right? We're now seeing an influx of private capital entering the space, which I've talked to Jim Gillespie about. He hasn't seen in his career really the almost unprecedented amount of private capital entering the space. So there are good things happening to preserve and create affordable housing. I think the question just becomes whether or not it's enough. In my eyes, it all comes down to capital and subsidy, right? So if you're not getting the subsidy from HUD for Section 8, right, it needs to come from other sources. So it's either falls on the cities or the state agencies or the private market, the private space.
That wraps up this edition of Mission Control, the Bellwether Enterprise Podcast. Check out all of our episodes on the Bellwether Enterprise YouTube channel and listen on the go on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'm Ryan Dentscheff, and this is Mission Control.